Conchita was a girl of Mexican heritage, and her people accounted for a relatively slender portion of the population in Washington County, Oklahoma. That county contained the tiny town of Oshaleta, near where she lived with her parents, and the county seat of Bartlesville, some 15 miles to the north. Her grandfather was born in Dallas, but moved to Bartlesville at the turn of the century. The reason for that move was a 6-year-old girl named Nellie Johnstone, whose stepfather convinced her to drop a charge of nitroglycerin down a well in 1897. The resulting explosion triggered a flow of petroleum that continued until 1963. Nellie's release of all that oil led to numerous other wells being opened in that part of Oklahoma, creating a demand for experienced roughnecks from as far away as Dallas. Conchita always had her doubts about Nellie's renowned stepfather. Back then, this part of Oklahoma was Indian territory, and he was one of those white men who claimed tribal status and consequently a share of tribal land simply because he persuaded an Osage woman to marry him. That kind of matchmaking was commonplace at the time, and many Indian women found themselves taken advantage of by unscrupulous non-Indian men who had no genuine interest in them or their tribe. That ugly history of indigenous people being victimized bothered Conchita. But there was also the question of what kind of man persuades his stepdaughter to drop explosives down a well that's only 35 feet deep. Imagine marrying a native woman for entirely selfish reasons and then using her daughter in such a reckless and cowardly manner. However, what may have been Nellie's last moment on earth resulted instead in something quite different. Two positive outcomes. First, the oil derrick was soon named Nellie Johnstone No. 1, becoming a monument to the most significant event in Oklahoma history. The second outcome was that this descendant of a Delaware chief ended up selling this oil well, which she inherited, to the people of Bartlesville in 1917, a decision that ensured her a life of privilege thereafter. The consequences for Conchita were no less astounding. Because of that March afternoon in 1897, she would ultimately be born in Oklahoma, not Texas. It also ensured her youth would be filled with her grandfather's promises of moving back to Texas. He never tired of describing this promised land, a part of Mexico Viejo, before it was invaded by the United States, where Mexican people were many, not few, where the legend of Juan Diego mattered, and where Catholic churches were found everywhere. Consequently, Conchita grew up feeling displaced from a land where she had never lived. Her family was like a tropical island in the middle of Lake Superior. That sense of displacement made her yearn for an identity that didn't label her as among the few, the brown, and the less than. Typical was her visit to a grocery store and hearing a woman aim an insult in her direction, which supposedly was an effort to try to be nice to Negroes. She said, "At least they're not Catholic." Conchita's primary survival tactic was to remain invisible. She enjoyed not being seen or mentioned. However, one fall afternoon, a man's voice called out to her. "Conchita," he said. "Aren't you Conchita?" She couldn't remember anyone other than family calling her name out so publicly. Yet that day, it was the one person she least expected. The man who owned the Bank of Oshaleta, a brand new Packard, and a beautiful home on the banks of the Caney River. He was also the man married to the most stunning woman in town, a woman who, like her grandfather, had come from Dallas, Texas. This man's place in the community was so exceptional that even white people called him Mr., as if Mr. were his first name. "Yes," she answered weakly, like another nearby woman might respond to that same name. "I understand your people are from Texas," he said. "Is that so?" "Well, if my grandpa had his wish," she responded, "we'd still be in Texas." He smiled. "You Texas people. It's like that's the only place on earth to live. I'm too familiar with the sentiment. My wife feels the very same way." "She's from Texas, then?" He answered as if describing something as evident as gravity. "Yes, indeed." "Well, give her my congratulations." This response was a bit cheeky, especially for Conchita, but Mr. Pence's smile now became a bit more convincing. "Actually, it's because your people are from Texas that my wife asked about you." "About me?" Conchita inquired. "Yes, about you. And there's a reason for that. A while back, we built a home out on the Caney River. And now, according to plan, we've got a little one due in February. The house is big, and we intend to fill it. But that's a lot for Thelma, my wife, to handle alone, especially since she gets a lot of being alone with me at the bank." This stranger's mention of something personal made Conchita feel slightly awkward, even as she wondered why he confided it in her. This seemed a high-class problem, and no one would consider her a high-class audience. Was she expected to sympathize with a young woman living in a big home simply because that woman was from Texas? Did this man know what her family would give for a problem like this? Clueless, her eyebrows knitted together as she asked, "I'm not sure how I could help, or even what Texas has to do with it." "What I'm trying to say," he offered, "is that we're looking for a young woman to stay at our home full time. Hopefully, she'd be able to arrive in the morning, and I'd be responsible for driving her home at night. She'd help with cooking, the household chores, and childcare when childcare becomes necessary." Still doubtful that what he said added up entirely, Conchita adopted a quizzical tone. "Does your wife know how young I am? She could find my childcare experience in any older sister, and I don't have any cooking skills at all." Then finally, Conchita decided to ask the question that was most central to the heart of the matter. "And does your wife know that I'm Catholic and that I'm Mexican?" The banker's smile disappeared as he adopted the manner of someone assuring a customer that his interest rates were competitive. Yes, she knows all of that. Your age is an advantage because she's looking for good company, someone near her own age. And everything else you mentioned matters less to her than your connection to Texas. I'd pay you what I pay my clerk here in the bank. Are you interested? There was a pause. Not because the terms of the opportunity were in question, but simply because the offer seemed so improbable. Yes, Mr. Pence, I would be interested. That brief conversation, held in the fall of 1926 near the corner of Main and Oshaleta, is how Conchita became a part of my grandparents' household. Each weekday, she and her grandfather would set out along Moose Lodge Road until it met the Caney River, which is about 8 miles north of Oshaleta. Back then, the stiff springs and cracked asphalt made that 8 miles feel much more like 18. But she'd arrive between 8 and 9 most mornings. It was indeed a lovely home with a beautiful view of the river. Yet even by Washington County standards, it seemed remote. Perhaps even more so because Thelma seemed utterly foreign to her context. It didn't take long for Conchita to realize she was employed mainly because her mistress needed a friend. When Conchita washed the laundry, Thelma hung it up on the clothesline. When Conchita chopped carrots, Thelma peeled potatoes. When Conchita cleaned the windows, she had to decide whether those windows would be inside or outside because Thelma would do the other. Fortunately, they got along famously, and Conchita never felt obliged to do the impossible, and that would be to try to hold up her end of the conversation. Thelma had stories to tell about fast cars that worked too well and church pastors that didn't work at all, about a crippled grandmother who had 7 children, and about how that grandmother had memories of standing on a gate and flying in the wind. The stories were vast, varied, and unending. Soon, Conchita came to think of her own life as thinned out compared to Thelma's wealth of memory. Yet, that wealth of memory was now confined to the banks of the Caney River, at a time when even well-off families had only a single car, and women seldom drove. Here was this bigger-than-life character incarcerated by privilege. Thelma's personality played out best as part of a large, messy family that attended a large, messy church. However, now she was relegated to the company of one man whose need for people was exhausted by making loans to them 6 days a week, and whatever meaning he attached to the 7th day was sustained neither by faith nor interest. Conchita, whose life did include a large, messy family and a large, messy church, became like a stream connecting Thelma to the reservoir of life. Yes, Conchita had never really lived in Texas, and she had a family Thelma would never really know. She attended a church with strange customs and services in an even stranger language. But still, Thelma envied her. For her part, Conchita was given a front row seat to a life with advantages she had only dreamed of. Thelma's stories were full of men who had gone to college, owned businesses and directed the lives of others. Her tales featured women who were appreciated, cared for, and catered to. They depicted people accustomed to winning and having their dreams come true. Yet Conchita also witnessed the trivial things that often became central in the lives of these people. She cared for a man's costly, exquisitely tailored suits, which were no more fit for purpose than her grandfather's coveralls. She polished and arranged pair after pair of Mr. Pence's shoes in the closet, each worth more than she made in a week. Among those shoes, one pair became especially galling. Crafted in Mr. Pence's unusually narrow size of 9.5 AAA, they were wingtips in a garish blend of cordovan and cream. They seemed appropriate only at the bar of a country club, yet even there you'd need to be wealthy to make them appear acceptable. In all their ugly eccentricity, they sat there, meticulously polished, rarely worn, and given pride of place, almost an insult to the worth of the person expected to care for them. So, within the walls of this lovely home lived two women who spent more time together than with anyone else. They liked each other, envied each other, and pitied each other, all for a strange mix of reasons more connected to themselves than to one another. Little did Thelma realize that this woman and those shoes would one day be central to a miracle that would beat at the very heart of her faith and her family.